and I'm very, very happy to give word to Ivan Kapitonov and Pavel Rudnev, who will speak about post-syntactic head movement and loanword accommodation in Kunbarlang verb phrases. Please.
Thank you, Petya. I'll do the screen share. And I don't need the chat. Okay, can you hear me and see the slides as well?
Yes, everything's perfect.
Thank you. So yes, what we're going to talk about today is we'll show you a range of complex predicate constructions in an Australian language called Kunbarlang, and we'll try to make sense of those structures and also see where our analysis lands in a theoretical landscape and what it tells us about the architecture of syntax. And essentially the claims that we're going to make today are that the range of structures that you'll see are all broadly compatible with a single underlying rather mainstream structure for verb phrases that maybe will resemble Marrence's analysis or Hale and Kaiser or something like that. And we'll show that the differences in the overt realization of that structure are conditioned by the extent of nativization of some part of the structure, and we'll also draw the conclusion that it necessitates, that this analysis necessitates post-syntactic head movement, at least in certain models of morphosyntax. Now, to start us off, let's first look at some data that will be relevant for today. And here is one of the central examples. It goes, and it means I dreamt of the sea. And what you should pay attention here is that there are two parts to that complex predicate. A light blue that is the root of an inflecting verb, meaning something like occur or wander about, or it has a very vague semantics. This particular one, we'll call it the light verb. And then there's a purple part, yeti, which is an uninflecting particle. In this particular example, it occurs encliticized to the inflected verb. And together, they form the predicate that means to dream of something, okay? And the equal sign that you see signifies that that purple particle is an enclitic, so you cannot tear it apart, you cannot intervene any extra material like adverbs in between the inflecting verb and that particle, so it just has to be there. Now consider two more structures, two more overt constructions with the same colors. So 2A is kadarnak manbum, but merek kita bular poni, meaning they only partially built or made that, but they didn't finish. And you'll see that the purple particle here occurs inside of the inflecting verb, and specifically immediately preceding the light verb in light blue, right? Finally, 2B is still a little different. Moro adajing share kadaunja. So in share ngadaunja, that means we share it. Two things to pay attention to now are share is an English loan word, and also it occurs in front of the inflecting verb. In fact, we're not going to show you all the examples, but trust us, this word, the share, can float around. So tends to occur preceding the inflected verb, but it can also follow it. There can be other material intervening between them. So throughout the rest of the talk, we'll be calling this structure as in 1 the post-verbal construction because the particle occurs after the verb. Then 2a is intraverbal particle, and 2b is the pre-verbal, just because it's the tendency of that particle to occur in front of the verb. Okay. And we call these complex predicate constructions, which we define pre-theoretically as those structures where more than one lexical head combines to convey the information that normally is associated with a single lexical verbal head. Okay, just a few words about the language that we're dealing with. The language is called Kunbarlang, and it is spoken in Northern Australia. Yeah, it is spoken in Northern Australia by some 30 to 40 speakers who are all adults. The language is declining. Unfortunately, it's still largely underdescribed, although there is some unpublished work from the 60s and the 80s. And in terms of its genetic classification, it's a non-Pama-Nyungan language that belongs to the Gunwingun family. So here's a funny little map. So the red dots are all the places where you're likely to find some speakers of the language. And the middle of the 3 red dots is, in fact, an island, island of Warawee, the place where I did most of the fieldwork reported here. So typologically speaking, it's a polysynthetic language with very rich verbal morphology, and which is kind of compensated by rather economical morphology in the nominal domain. It has unrestricted prodrop. The word order does not convey grammatical information, but rather is dictated by discourse and information structure considerations, but SVO seems to be the neutral word order. And it's polypersonal, it has noun incorporation, it has valency changing derivations, and also it has noun classes within the noun domain. Now, to our main business, as I said, we are going to argue that the 3 constructions that looked so different on the surface, in fact, manifest the same underlying structure. What allows us to argue for that unity? Several facts. The fact that the 2 parts that we find, the blue and the purple thing that we find in all 3 constructions, play identical roles in building the predicate. We also see that they are in complementary distribution, which I'll show you in a second. And extra evidence comes if we compare Kunbarlang to other languages within its family, so other Gunwingun languages. Now, thinking about the complex predicate construction, we find that in all 3 of these constructions, the particle, the purple thing, does not saturate theta requirements of the light verb. And interestingly, the resulting predicate may differ from the original light verb in its semantics, often in a non-transparent way, and also in its argument structure. And also apparently may differ in its factual properties, although this is a little harder to tell. For an illustration, consider example 3. Kajangai kolk means they cut it down, for instance, the tree, where if you just omit the purple part, the kolk, just kajangai means they were standing. So a rather large leap in both the semantics and also the fact that an initially intransitive predicate becomes a transitive one. Not really visible here, but you can show it. Now, speaking about complementary distribution, we first separate the preverbal particle constructions, where they're really distinct because we find them only. So I didn't say that, but there's a for the postverbal and for the intraverbal constructions, for each of them, there's a range of light verbs that are that participate in those constructions. But the preverbal construction is set apart by the fact that the only light verb that is possible there is the verb "wundje." That means something like to perform, to say, or to do. They are really distinct because the English loan does not have rigid placement restrictions that we find with the other two constructions. So they're different on the one hand, and on the other hand, we see that, for instance, so for the intra and postverbal particle constructions, we see that only one particle is able to combine with a light verb. So 4a shows an example where you have an intraverbal particle, they fled in fear. So we have a light verb to go that combines with something to mean flee. We can use the same light verb to construct a predicate meaning run. He or she always goes running, but crucially, we cannot have both the intraverbal and the postverbal construction, even in the cases where semantically it seems fit. So examples like karaelki and kulkul are out, which could potentially mean they fled running in fear. Finally, when we look outside of Kunbarlang into other Gnuingan languages and see what complex predicate constructions we find there, we see that we only find, so the complex stems, the construction with the intraverbal particle is the family trait of the Gnuingan family. So it's found throughout the family. But this particular construction with just these properties where you have the particle following the inflected verb is unique to Kunbarlang. And we conclude that it's an innovation. And looking at the lexical items, we find that many particles, wherever they occur, have cognates both in other Gnuingan languages and in an Iwaijan language, Maung, which Kunbarlang has been in contact with for the last about 100 years, in very close contact, but it's an Iwaijan language, it's in a different family. But from these observations, we conclude that there has been an original complex predicate construction that in Kunbarlang has diverged into two types of structures. One where the particle is within the inflectant verb, linearly inside of the inflectant verb. And the other one, the kind of novel one, where the particle is outside of the verb. And that we say that the novel construction is probably developed in contact with Maung to aid lexical exchange between these languages. Interestingly, Maung happens to be the only Iwaijan language that has also developed a very similar construction with a post-verbal particle. And basically, this type of structure was generalized for loaning predicates, like today we observe with the ad hoc English borrowings, right? In the what we call the preverbal particle construction. Okay.
Sorry, I must tell you that you have 5 minutes left.
Okay, all right. That shall do. If we look now at those particles in terms of their origin, as you know, these cognacy groups suggest, we see that they kind of fall into 3 classes. The clearest class being the English loans, which correspond one-to-one to the preverbal particle constructions. And then there is a group of the last bullet point, the intraverbal particles either have cognates in other Gunwingan languages, suggesting they're inherited from a Proto-Gunwingan stage, or they have Kunbarlang origin. And then the particles that are found post-verbally, there's a large group of them that are shared with Maung, suggesting that they've been acquired during the contact with Maung. So our proposal is that the 3 morphosyntactic overt constructions essentially show grammaticalization, categorical grammaticalization of a continual process of nativization of those loaned predicates. So the least nativized items, like the English verbs, go into the preverb construction, and then the fully nativized items can go inside of the verb. And then there's the middle ground of the post-verbal particle construction, which are for the items that are in kind of an intermediate nativization stage. So from this, we also draw the prediction that if some single particle occurs in 2 constructions, one of those 2 constructions must be the post-verbal construction, and this prediction is borne out. We'll skip this in the interest of time, and we rush to our analysis. So we'll call, as I have been calling, the particles, all of the particles, just the particles, not trying to label them as any customary part of speech. And as I said, we claim that all of these, all 3 surface constructions manifest the same underlying structure, where a light verb combines with a phrase formed with the participation of that particle. And then the surface realization depends on the choice of the particular particle, which, if it has been nativized somewhat, can be specified as a prefix or a suffix. But if it is an ad hoc loan, it's not specified as any part of native morphology. And this is very crucial because it means that we need lexical information, not syntactic, not semantic, not even phonological. It's some lexical information that only becomes available when the lexical item, the vocabulary item, enters our syntactic computation. And this draws us to conclude that the movement, the linear arrangement of the particle, has to happen post-syntactically. Okay, I see that. Thank you. Now, this is the base structure that I've already shown you in a flat representation, and let's see how it develops to do all the surface manifestations. So one construction is obtained via rearrangement. So the particle is specified as a prefix. So it must join. I'll just jump to the trees and I'll talk through these bullet points as I show you the structures. So if the particle, like the particle Martin here, is specified to be a prefix, then upon the vocabulary insertion, it undergoes head movement to join the little v, and then they together get the inflection, and we get the linear order. If we have a post-verbal construction, then the particle nur here is specified to be a suffix, so it never does the head movement to join the verbal complex here, and it gives us the other order. And finally, in the preverbal construction, because heading is not part of the native morphology at all, it has no morphological specification, so it is free to scramble after the construction of the verbal word is complete. And we'll have to skip this Dalapon example. And I'll just go to the implications for syntax and conclusions. So in the mainstream style of distributed morphology, late insertion of vocabulary items is assumed. And if this happens to be the case, then we argue that our data necessitate post-syntactic head movement, which does not deny the fact that there are other languages, right, like Germanic languages, where head movement still has to be syntactic and not post-syntactic. So we kind of run into a situation where there are, within just the head movement itself, there are still two distinct types, let alone the phrasal movement, which is different altogether. And we leave it for further exploration to what extent these data and the analysis that we have in mind, which unifies them into a single underline structure, is amenable to an early insertion model. And for the time being, we conclude that we have shown you a range of structures that look different on the surface, but they're compatible with a single underlying structure that kind of serves the same purpose, and that the overt differences are conditioned by the extent of nativization of the predicative morpheme, and that we need post-syntactic head movement to account for these structures. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vanya. I apologize for some technical problems. For whatever reason, my eraser tool doesn't work. But anyway, we have some 7 minutes for questions. So please, are there any questions or comments?
Should I stop the screen share and?
Yes, probably. Are there any questions or comments?
Mark Baker.
I don't see. Mark? Yes, please.
I could ask something. I was wondering whether, according to the derivation that you had at the end for the post-verbal version, if this implies that you need to commit yourself to a rigid head initial underlying phrase structure for this language, which otherwise might be polysynthetic free word order, and whether you thought that there was any supporting evidence that that was the basic underlying order.
Pasha, will you take it? Okay.
Okay. Hopefully you can hear me now. So would you handle this, or shall I? I think you're better qualified.
I'm sorry, was I not heard? Do I need to repeat?
No, you were heard perfectly. Right. So so I suppose the question, there are two separate issues here. So one is polysynthesis, the other is, let's say, head initiality, head finality, and Kunbarlang shows a mixture of. I mean, it all depends on the proper analysis of clause structure, obviously, because I mean, certain morphemes appear suffixally, others appear prefixally. But then you have the let's say the neutral SVO order as the basic order of the clause, right? So I don't think there is. I don't think the structure in 9, that is the structure for heading na munye kuriya, so with the postverbal construction, really entails anything about the linear order of the heads until we know what heads are realized where, right? I mean, is English a head final language, realizing inflection as a suffix on the verb, right? So here we are dealing with the same sort of problem. So the verb precedes the object, but then let's say inflection morphemes which sort of follow sort of obey the mirror principle, right? Are realized in the inverse order, right? So it all depends on the proper analysis, which we don't have at this moment, I suppose.
Yeah, a quick follow-up comment. You know, my favorite polysynthetic free word order language is Mohawk. But occasionally you do find some evidence for an underlying word order. For example, complementizers always coming before the embedded clause. And there aren't a lot of these, but as far as I know, they are consistent. So, you know, maybe.
Ivan, you should be able to say something about this. I mean, the order of complementizer versus the embedded clause.
Yes, indeed, to the extent that we can diagnose that, it seems that it is a head initial language. So the base structure that we propose is indeed consistent with any other evidence that we have.
Okay, there is still time for one short question, please. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, if no one wants to ask a question, then I'll take liberty and make a short cross-linguistic comment. As Vanya certainly knows, in Northwest Caucasian languages, which he has also worked on, there is, well, a similar fact that you cannot insert a Russian loan verb into the polysynthetic structure of the verb. Interestingly, in Abaza, there are loan verbs from Cambodian, from a sister language, and they can be inserted while they behave like ordinary verbs, but Russian loan verbs do not behave this way. And so this difference between different types of, well, more or less native, so to say, verbs, well, elements and their behavior with respect to morphology, it's certainly very interesting regardless of, well, the theoretical framework one applies to them. Thank you very much.
Very nice.